In today's session, let's talk about AWS ECS. Why have to choose it? ECS stands for Elastic Container Service. What is the benefit of it? It is fully managed container orchestration service. For example, I use a declarative approach right now. In the declarative approach, I will define what are the resources I want to spin up, and rest of the job will be done by your ECS cluster. It is as simple as that. And underlying infra is managed by your cloud service provider AWS. You can run and scale workload containers across AWS cloud regions on premises without the complexity of managing a control plane. For example, I want to spin up the cluster. I can create my cluster across the regions of AWS cloud of different availability zones, or for example, I have a few computes running on my on premises. Then I can integrate it to my ECS cluster by using AWS Anywhere. That is the integration what we have in our ECS cluster. In the Fargate, you no need to manage your underlying infra. You have to pay the charges only for the amount of CPU and memory that is consumed by the container running on the Fargate platform. ECS helps to easily deploy, manage, and scale the containerized applications over AWS. It is easy to deploy. As I told you, it is an orchestrated approach where we have to use a declarative in order to create that particular resources. I can manage them. I can monitor. If something goes wrong, it will get replaced, or it will scale out, or it will scale in based on the requirement of the application. With this approach, there is no need for us to set up, install, operate container orchestration tools on a physical or a virtual machine. I no need to configure anything here. We no need to worry about that. Why? Because you have to tell what are the specifications you want to enable. Rest of the job will be done by your AWS itself. Now, how we can integrate other AWS services as part of ECS cluster? By default, it is EC2. We are going to launch our control plane and compute plane by default on EC2 compute. Not only that, we can also use Fargate profile, which is a serverless architecture. Apart from this, we can integrate IAM as part of users authentication, role authentication, and then we can attach policies for authorization. What are the actions we can perform? All those things will be decided under IAM policy. Apart from this, we have VPC network. In order to spin up this ECS cluster, we have to specify the network, how you want to create. Do you want to create an isolated network like private? Do you want to use a public network, or do you want to use a combination of both? We can define that by creating a VPC network. And also we can integrate auto scaling group. Whenever you try to say create a compute plane, those compute plane will get created as part of auto scaling group. It will manage. Why? Because if something goes wrong, there is some failure in one of the EC2 compute, and that will get replaced. Or let us say there is a metric calculation right now. If the CPU is crossing beyond 70%, I have to increase the number of computes that I have in ECS cluster. These things will be handled by auto scaling group. After that, we can integrate Elastic Load Balancer service as well, application load balancer and network load balancer as well, for internet facing or internal as well. Depends upon the type of access that we want to give to our applications. Not only that, we can attach our AWS storage services like EBS, Elastic Block Storage, and then Elastic File System. And then in order to monitor the metrics and logs, we use CloudWatch that can be integrated to ECS. And finally, SNS notification, which stands for Simple Notification Service. Now, these are the important points that we need to remember as part of AWS ECS. Now, let us see what are the key features we have on AWS ECS. First point, we need to remember that integrated and serverless design of AWS Fargate. What does it mean? I have a platform where I can run my container on Fargate so that the charges will be applied only for the amount of CPU and memory we have used. I no need to pay for the underlying infra. That's the advantage what I have. If I delete my container, automatically the Fargate will get deleted. And next one is hybrid deployment. What does it mean? I can deploy my compute on my AWS cloud or on premises. By using AWS Anywhere, we can integrate our on-premises compute plane nodes to the ECS cluster control plane so that it can manage the application deployment of the cluster. And then security and isolation by design. What does it mean? By default, internally it uses MTLS authentication and encryption. Apart from this, we can configure IAM users and policies. What's the benefit of it? If someone wants to access your resources of ECS service, we can create an IAM user or a role, and then we can attach some policies based on the actions they want to perform. Or this particular ECS wants to talk to other services. We can create a role and we can attach the policy. Those are the internal security options that we can use as part of ECS. Not only that, we can use guard duty, where it will try to track, and if there are some attacks, and it will report you that particular information as well. These are the additional options that we can enable, and we can protect our ECS cluster from cyber attacks. Finally, it is a fully managed control plane. What does it mean? In any cluster you take, as I told you, we have a control plane and compute plane. This entire resource will be managed by AWS service provider. Now, these are the key points that you have to remember as part of ECS. That's all for this particular session. Thank you.